Welcome back to the Bible in Context. Hey, Nate.
How are you doing, Caleb?
Doing good. Like you said, it's raining again just because we're recording.
It is. It was funny. I looked at the weather this morning, and it was saying sunny and 67. I was getting excited to have a cookout tonight, and of course, we scheduled to do our podcast. So I just should assume that it's going to rain.
Yeah,
so,
that was a bummer. I was looking forward to having some pizza.
Yeah, we have a pizza oven that we fire up occasionally, and it's been a while. I'm hankering for some pizza myself. So where are we? We're back in Genesis.
Yep, we just left off with Melchizedek, and so there's a part of chapter 14 we didn't talk about, and that's the little exchange between Abraham and Sodom. So just as a little recap, we left off with Melchizedek, who may or may not be Yahweh. I'm going to say 90 to 95% probably Yahweh, maybe not. And he is a priest, he is the king of righteousness, king of peace, he is king of the future site of Jerusalem. So he has, either way, all these messianic overtones. He is someone outside of Abraham's family who Abraham submits to and recognizes as the greater, as a representative, as a priest of Yahweh. So this guy's really important, and that's where we left off with.
And later on, he's considered as a priest forever, which,
yeah,
of course, points to Christ again.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's very significant, even though he has such a short section, and it's kind of confusing as to why he's in there. But when you see all these factors working together, you get this picture of like, okay, there's still someone greater than Abraham who represents Yahweh and is represented as a human. So that's he's a cool character. Yeah,
he's significant for sure. And so after that, there's something interesting that happens with the King of Sodom. You want to explain what's going on there?
Yeah, so the King of Sodom comes to Abraham and says, give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself. Sodom, or the King of Sodom, he's just offering basically all the spoils of this battle that Sodom has the right to Abram. The King of Sodom is even offering his own possessions that were taken in the battle to Abraham, I think. Now, there's a catch to this, though, because this wasn't just a payment for him winning the battle. The King of Sodom was giving what was rightfully his to Abraham. But this is an honor-shame culture. And so by offering all of this to Abraham, Abraham would have become...
Would have owed him something.
Yeah, he would have owed his loyalty in some form or fashion to the King of Sodom. So that's why Abram says, I have lifted my hand to Yahweh, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, I made Abram rich. So he could call in that favor at some point and say, hey, look, you owe me favor or loyalty or something in the future because I made you what you are. I gave you everything that you have. I am now the suzerain and you are the vassal.
Right. So, and this is a significant topic that I think helps us better understand the Bible. So in our culture, the most ideal gift is something that has no strings, right? No strings attached. But in this ancient culture, gifts had a different purpose. It wasn't just to bless somebody, but it was to help spur along a deeper relationship with the person. So the expectation when you gave a gift to somebody is that they would actually reciprocate, that they would give something back. But that was a good thing.
Yeah, it wasn't like a form of payment or making sure everybody had a net zero exchange, making sure everybody's even. It's about extending the relationship.
Right. Now, if you were not so good person, though, you would use that kind of mentality to manipulate people. And that's what we think is happening here.
Yeah, and not to say that doesn't happen in this kind of culture. There's good expressions of this and bad expressions. Just like for us, like you said, the most perfect gift is the one that's completely altruistic. It's no strings attached. Well, I can take that and either say, hey, you gave a gift, you're giving an expression of friendship, so I want to extend that and give you maybe not something of the same value, but still something to continue the friendship. Or I could just say, hey, this is mine now, and see ya. So that's how it's abused on our side of things.
Right. Well, and still today, you can go to cultures that still have this kind of mentality when it comes to gift giving. I've heard of stories of people going on vacation down in South America, and there'll be somebody when they get off the plane that's offering them to, like, hey, I'll carry your bags for you. But they're always expecting something in return for that gift that they're giving you, right? And so, in that way, that sometimes you can get manipulated as a dumb American going to a foreign land, and you can get scammed out of your out of your money.
Yeah, and I think that even though we don't think in these terms, I think this is still in a small way alive in our culture, because if you do give somebody a gift, if they just take it and run off and don't, they show no expression of friendship, it's like that's,
or at least say thank you, right?
Right, yeah, it's like you're being a jerk.
Yeah.
So we have a granular form of this.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that's what Sodom here is trying to do. He's trying to manipulate Abraham and take control of him, to make Abraham beholden to Sodom and its people. So he says, no, I'm only beholden to Yahweh. I know exactly what this relationship is going to do. I don't need your riches. I could have come away pretty wealthy after this and really increased my property, but no, Yahweh is my reward, and I'm not taking anything from you. I'm not establishing any sort of negative relationship with you. But how is this different than his covenant with the Amorites?
What do you mean by that?
So we talked about earlier in this same chapter, in chapter 14, that Abram had friends who were Amorites. They were possessors of a covenant. So there, he is bonded to those people. He's bonded to the Amorites. So why would this be different?
Probably because of the motivation behind their relationship. Sodom, who's already been labeled as an evil city, right? Or this is where wicked people live, and so you would expect the king of Sodom to be wicked. And so Abraham to join into this kind of relationship would not be honoring to God. Sodom seems to want all the glory, where the other relationships, the other covenants that Abram has entered into already seem to be more of a mutual, everybody's benefiting from them.
Yeah, this is more a familial covenant. They became brothers through this, and you see the nations coming to dwell with Abraham, probably seeing that Abram's been blessed by Yahweh, and they want to more or less become part of his family, and through their trust in Yahweh's elect, reap some of those benefits. But it's a mutual relationship where everyone is upheld and honored.
Do you feel like this is one of those kind of almost like a test of Abram's faith, where you have the king of Sodom, who's kind of like the serpent in the garden, who's offering this gift, but instead of looking at it and seeing it's delightful and taking it, Abram says, no, I'm going to follow Yahweh.
Yeah, absolutely. I think absolutely the next chapter is going to, I think, really point in that direction. Well, and I did say a lot about how the previous covenant is an equal and familial relationship. It may seem like I've said a little bit too much about that, but this is actually a theme. Both what Sodom's doing and covenants with the nations become a theme through Genesis, and we'll fill this out more as we go. So, yeah, I think that was definitely a test moment here, because if we go to chapter 15, in the first couple of verses there...
Well, yeah, right at the very beginning of chapter 15, after these things, and so there's an intentional link back to what just happened.
And then what is the first thing that Yahweh says?
Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. And the language there, of course, is not... I don't think the ESV does this very well. I think the KJV does it better, where it says, I am your shield, and basically, I am your reward. And so you don't need to take anything from the king of Sodom. You already have everything you need in me.
There's not really something suggesting that this should be broken up the way the ESV has it, saying that he will reward him, but rather that Yahweh is the shield and the reward.
Yeah.
So I liked how you pointed that out in your sermon, because I actually didn't notice that before when I'd read through this. So this statement is directly linking us back to the previous battle and the potential rewards. He just went into battle. Yahweh is his shield. He got tested with a reward that would link him to a terrible nation, but Yahweh is his reward. He passes these tests, and Yahweh reminds him of that. And so because of that, they're going to go on, and Yahweh is going to deepen his covenant with Abram and promise him his elect seed once again. Before we talk about that, though, is there anything interesting about verse 1 of chapter 15?
You've got the word of the Lord came. to Abram in a vision.
Yeah, the word of the Lord was not heard. The word of the Lord was seen in a vision. Now, we go on, and the word of the Lord is then the one that says this to Abram. Fear not, I am your shield and your reward. Then Abram says, O Yahweh God, what will you give me? He goes on. But he calls the word of the Lord here, whoever this is that has appeared to him, Yahweh himself. And then you get to the very end of this exchange in verse 6, and he says he believed Yahweh. And then in verse 7, we still have the word of the Lord here, and it says, I am Yahweh who brought you up from Ur of the Chaldeans. And again, Abram says in verse 8, O Yahweh God, and it just keeps going on where the word of Yahweh is being called and referred to by Abram as Yahweh. And remember, the author is crafting this narrative, putting these words in Abram's mouth. So this is not just, Abram might have had this wrong, but I'm just going to write it down verbatim. This is a crafted narrative. Whenever Abram calls the word of Yahweh, Yahweh, we're intended to see that and believe it. Now, we have future texts that pick up on this. Can you think of one?
Yeah, so John 1 is the word of the Lord.
That whole gospel starts out with, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
And the Word became flesh.
Right.
So you could see the Word.
Right. Which, this, if you ever have any Jehovah's Witness friends, I think it's beneficial to bring them back here because you want to sit there and debate about the Greek structure of John 1
right.
forever, and you can do that until you're blue in the face, and you're not going to get anywhere because you just disagree on it. Well, in Genesis and on through the rest of the Old Testament, you have the Word appearing, and the Word is Yahweh. So there's no if and or buts about it when you come back here. And if you, there's a really good book, we've mentioned it a couple times, The Angel of the Lord by Michael Foreman and Douglas Van Dorn. Really good book. It goes more in depth to this. We're just highlighting it here in chapter 15 because it shows up here as we're talking about this. But the word of the Lord shows up all throughout the Old Testament. And so if you want to know more about that, definitely get that book and take a look.
Yeah, especially in the prophets, all over the place with the prophets.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is where we start out seeing someone who is Yahweh, but still distinct from Yahweh.
Right.
So we kind of have the first seed of, Trinitarian thought right here.
Yeah.
Let's back up here to the first 6 verses of chapter 15, and we have Yahweh and Abram talking about the fact that Abram is going to have a son, his elect son, but right now, all he has is someone who's not his own offspring to inherit his house. He doesn't have a son, and he's getting older. So in this, he questions Yahweh's promise and asks, how is it going to be? And so Yahweh further promises this son and says, look, you're going to have children the number of the stars, if you're able to number them. And again, he tells him that you're also going to inherit this land in the next section, the land of Canaan. Again, Abram, he questions this. How do I know I'm going to possess it? And I just want to bring out that Abram here, he's questioning these things because in the next couple chapters, Sarah's going to question some things too. She's going to say, well, I'm too old and there's no way I can have a baby whenever Yahweh promises it to her. And so what's the difference between Sarah's questioning and Abram's questioning? Because with Abram, he just says, okay, look, let's just make a covenant and I'll seal the deal and put my name on the line so that you know that my name is at stake if you don't get these promises. So I'll bring it to pass. With Sarai, or Sarah, whenever she questions it, he calls her out and rebukes her. Now, we'll talk about this more when we get there, but what might be a reason that Yahweh gives a promise to Abram whenever he questions Yahweh, and he calls out Sarah whenever she questions Yahweh?
That's a great question.
I think there's a really good analogy for this in, I think it's Matthew, where Zechariah is questioning the angel that comes and says that they're going to have a son named John, and then Mary, she also questions the angel. How do I know how is it that I'm going to have a baby?
Right.
When I'm,
And John gets muted.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But Mary doesn't.
Right. And so I think there probably is a difference in the question here where Abram is just saying, just like Mary, how is this going to happen?
How is this possible?
Right. How is this possible? Or I still haven't seen it yet. When is it going to happen? How do I know you're going to do this?
So he hasn't lost faith.
Right.
Where Sarah is
and
Zechariah are like, you're crazy.
Yeah. They're like, this is impossible, so I don't think that you can do it.
Right.
I don't think you will do it. You're reliable enough to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like there might have been a little bit of doubt in Abram or
Yeah,
Abraham.
there obviously was some.
But Sarah takes it to a whole other level and just has lost faith.
Yeah. And I think that's a good analogy, too, for our own doubts and thoughts. I mean, all through the Psalms, you see places where David or the psalmist is doubting. He's saying, this is a bad spot. I don't see how you're going to get us out of this. But in the end, I'll praise you. My trust resides in you.
Yeah, that's helpful.
And I think that's good just to say, too, like, you can ask the hard questions. The questions you're not supposed to ask in church, ask them, because it's better to talk about it and get an answer and still be holding on to Jesus the whole way through, rather than to just say, because of this issue, I'm letting go of Jesus altogether.
Yeah. And I remember now, like when I was preaching through this, I what came to my mind was that situation where you had the father who was asking Jesus to heal his daughter, and he says to Jesus, I believe, help my unbelief. And so there's faith there, but obviously it's mixed with anxiety, and this is life. This is what it means to be human, that we believe, and yet there's still unbelief mixed in with it.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
What comes next?
Maybe we should talk a little bit about the fact that, I just mentioned, this is a very famous verse, chapter 15, verse 6. And he believed Yahweh when he promised him his offspring, and it was counted to him as righteousness. So that word righteousness, too, I think it's worth pointing out that, what do you think of when you think righteousness? Or maybe, what do a lot of people think of?
I think they think of someone who has been deemed perfect.
Okay. Some kind of metaphysical reality to being righteous. It's part of your core essence in a way or something.
Yeah.
Okay. I think some might think of it too as like a judicial decree. Yeah. Especially when you come from maybe more of a
justified and righteousness.
Right, the New Testament debates.
Yeah.
But in the Hebrew idea, and I think this is true in the New Testament as well, because the New Testament comes from the Old Testament, is that righteousness has to do with being in right relationship with others. And so here, even despite his doubts, he is believing, he is trusting, he is counting Yahweh as able to come through and willing to come through on his promises. And so therefore, he was counted to be in right relationship with Yahweh. Which, if you get right down to it, that's what ultimately matters, because if you're in right relationship with him, whenever the judge comes, whenever Yahweh comes, he's going to bring you into his house.
That's right. Yeah, I think it's really helpful to understand righteousness as a relationship term, and it's easy to remember then too, because it just means that you're in right relationship with somebody. Yeah,
which it makes it. I mean, this is just another way to say what you just said, but it's relational and personal, and not metaphysical and mysterious and detached from our interactions with people day to day.
Yeah.
Which also means you can't be righteous and neglect your brothers and sisters. There's all kinds of implications to that. Right. Righteousness is relational.
Well, and you see that word paired often with justice. If you're righteous, you're also just. You're acting in such a way that you're being just towards other people. You're
being fair.
You're being fair. You're treating them how you would want to be treated.
Yeah,
is another way to look at it.
So just a small thing to bring out this time. I think it's just very important to talk about how that's relational. It's community centered.
Sounds good. Okay, so we move on then. What do we have coming next?
I feel like we're kind of a commentary today. We're just like, what's next? Jumping around. We're not following a story very well. But no, next we have where Abram questions Yahweh as to how he's going to possess the land. And so Yahweh decides to make a covenant. And so he says, bring me a heifer, three male goats, a ram a year old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon, and cut them all in half and lay them opposite one another on the ground. And this was a common way to make a covenant in the ancient Near East. So this isn't some kind of, super weird new thing. This is just part and parcel of ancient Near Eastern covenants. So all this activity, we shouldn't read it as some kind of, super, super weird thing that needs to be kind of spiritualized and allegorized out. It's just showing that they're making a normal covenant. Just like today, he would have said, how do I know that I'm supposed to possess this? Okay, go get a paper, start writing down the terms and conditions, and then we're both going to sign it.
Right. And I do think there was more symbolism back then. Like it meant something.
Yeah, well, the whole thing is if you walk through these animals, and then basically you're saying as you do that, if I don't come through on my side of the bargain, may I be filleted and killed like these animals.
Right. I'm trying to think if there's any kind of modern day equivalent to something like that.
Yeah, I don't know that we have anything that we kind of...
pinky swear, but I mean, that's not...
Yeah, there's nothing really that we actually vow our own well-being on.
Right. I swear on my grandmother's grave.
Like that kind of stuff.
We have those silly sayings, but there's nothing that we're literally ripping apart an animal to walk through it.
Well, I guess actually maybe a good I think maybe a good analogy would be you're not dying but still suffering of some sort. If I don't come through on my side of the bargain, I owe you X amount of dollars. That's a typical contract.
Yeah, that is true. There's a collateral.
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah. Which is not just symbolic though.
Right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you literally will lose whatever you've put up as collateral.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think even in this, so we're going to cover this in a couple of weeks, but there's some quotes I want to read from a book by Jeffrey Niehaus. And I'll read those quotes in a couple of weeks when we go over the covenant in chapter 17. But this covenant here, the covenant that God makes with his people at Sinai with Israel and here with Abram is basically the vassal, and Yahweh is playing the role of a suzerain. There's suzerain-vassal treaties all through the ancient Near East. Let me explain what those are. That's basically like your nobles and your peasants, or something like that, where the vassal would owe allegiances to the suzerain, and they would have kind of a treaty. The vassal is to show loyalty and love and maybe even pay some kind of tribute to the suzerain. He's supposed to uphold the honor of the suzerain, behave in a way that makes the suzerain look good as the one who rules him. And if he violates that, there could be actually very devastating, being ripped in half kind of consequences.
That's true. So it wasn't always just symbolic. There was your life was the collateral.
Right. Yeah, because this is getting onto a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's a kind of a cool one. And I think it will make sense of a lot of Israel's covenant with Yahweh as well, is that vassal is to uphold the suzerain's honor and show how he is good to his neighbors, essentially, to the other surrounding kingdoms. If that vassal begins to behave in a way that reflects poorly on the suzerain and makes him look bad, then that suzerain, for the sake of his honor and his name, which was a very high value thing, that's not just like, he's just being petty and wants to uphold his own glory. This is a very serious thing back then, especially for a king and the way that their society worked. To uphold that honor and his name, he has to show that what his vassal is doing does not reflect him well. He has to show disregard towards what his vassal is doing if he's behaving poorly. And some of the ways that you could do that is to destroy them. That's a lot of what you see in the Old Testament, where Israel is supposed to reflect Yahweh to the nations. And they do it so badly, they make Yahweh look horrible. So how does he uphold his name? By destroying the bad mirror of himself, Israel.
Right.
Because he's saying, no, I am not that way. You guys are representing me like this, but I'm showing the nations that I do not condone this. That I am actually a good ruler, and I don't condone all the exploitation and the murder and the sexual immorality and all the things you guys are doing.
Right.
So I'm showing that I'm against that.
Yeah. Well, and it's I think it's significant too. You go to the New Testament, and when Paul is describing what sin is, he says in Romans 3:23, famous passage, that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And that word glory is very much tied up with honor.
Yeah,
that Jesus had to come to basically, he honors and glorifies Yahweh. And the only way that we are going to be able to do that is if we're connected to the Messiah.
Yeah, I think that's another one too, where glory is a very metaphysical, just off in space kind of term, but that kind of brings it down to earth a bit.
Yeah. When you think of glory as honor, somebody's honor, and so we've all fallen short of honoring God in the way that we were designed to do.
I think this makes a lot of sense with. If any of you have jobs where you get to go outside of your actual working facility wearing a badge or a shirt with the company name on it, and they say, look, act like you represent this company.
Right.
And if you go out there and act like an idiot, you're not living up to the name of your business. You're not living up to the glory of the business that you represent.
Yeah. So
it's a lesser degree, but it's the same exact thing that we deal with.
Yeah. Well, and then as Christians, this is the call that Jesus gives us, right? Go, therefore, and be my witnesses, which is the same idea. And Paul later on calls us that we're ambassadors of God, and Peter calls us royal priests. And so we very much are commissioned to reflect the glory and the honor of God. And we're not going to do that perfectly. But and Abram is not going to perfectly honor Yahweh. We're going to see that here soon. And so thank goodness we have a God who is gracious and merciful and slow to anger, and that he does remain faithful and loyal to us.
Yeah. Well, and I hope you're getting the sense, too, that you don't need to know anything about the ancient Near East to trust in Jesus. But if you really want to understand your Old Testament, it helps so much to know how ancient Near Eastern relationships and kingdoms work.
Right. Now, okay, do you think it's significant that Abram never actually walked through between the animals? It's only the image of the fire pot, which represents God's presence.
Right, yeah. No, I mean, yeah, that's like in the contract example that we talked about a few minutes ago. Basically, Yahweh is the one that signs the dotted line and says, you don't have to sign it because I'm not going to hold you to this.
Yeah, I think that's significant. And it shows you the character of God and his desire. And I think a lot of it's because he looks at Abram as his child. Like if you would not have your child sign away his life if you were making an agreement with your child, you're not gonna, even if they mess up, you're not gonna just do away with them. You're gonna do whatever it takes to draw them back as much as you can, at least.
Yeah, Yahweh is the one that puts himself on the line, and this has been the character of Yahweh already with Abram, because at first we started out with commands with Adam, subdue the land. And then we get to Abram, he says, no, I'm going to make you a king. I'm going to give you this land. So the weight becomes, probably because he's already had a few iterations of humans who just keep messing it up. So now he's saying, like, okay, the weight is not on you. I'm going to make this happen.
Yeah. And it's not that Yahweh doesn't have any expectations for Abram. I mean, and we're going to see this later on, that he very much has expectations for him to walk before him and be blameless. I mean, these are pretty serious expectations, actually.
Yeah, and later in the story we're going to see Abram has a chance to blow it, too.
Yeah.
He doesn't, but he has a chance to blow it.
Right.
But even if he does blow it, I mean, Yahweh can make it happen another way. So there's always a way Yahweh will work out his plans.
Well, and ultimately his family does blow it. And,
right.
You know,
right, yeah,
like the Israelites blow it completely.
Yeah, they all get exiled, and that becomes the way that they become ministers to the nations whenever Jesus comes, because they all come from the nations back to Jerusalem after Jesus' death, and they go back home to all the nations, and they tell them all about Jesus.
That's right.
So even whenever it's completely flipped on his head, he makes it work out.
That's right.
No, that was good. Okay, we talked a lot about, we kind of got a little off track talking about the covenants and the kingdoms and things. There's something else we should cover in this little covenant ceremony with Yahweh going through the animals and what he says in verse 16. But I think that's going to have to wait till next week because we're running a little short on time. So we will pick that up next time.
Sounds good.